Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast. Thank you so much for coming. You're in for a treat today with Professor David Buss. He is a professor of psychology at the University of Texas. He is the world's leading expert on strategies in mating and an author with several books, his latest being When Men Behave Badly. So I'm really fascinated with why people choose certain people, what the psychology of cheating is, the psychology of sex, the mating hierarchies. They call it mate value. Women sort of date lateral and up with the status and success, and men tend to date lateral and down. You know, because I'm in this unique position being a woman, but yet being successful. Yeah, of course, I'm very curious. So today was a conversation about that. We talked a lot about sex, a lot about why partners want to have sex, the kind of partners they choose, why they want to have sex, cheating and why people cheat in relationships, partners choosing partners. We talked about marriage later in the episode, about if that's sort of an institution that'll stick around or not. Super interesting stuff. So enjoy this conversation. Please hit the subscribe button. Deeply appreciate that. And let me know what you think in the comments. And just thanks for coming by. Today's Pretty Intense partner is Athletic Greens. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens literally every day. Covering my nutritional basis for the day couldn't be any easier, which is why I trust Athletic Greens. Just a mix of 1 scoop of AG1 with water first thing in the morning, done. I also like that it costs less than $3 a day. Pretty good if you ask me. It's a really effective daily habit with the highest quality sourced ingredients. Win-win. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/prettyintense. That's athleticgreens.com/prettyintense. Check it out. Thank you very much for doing this. I have such a burning passion for psychology and what makes people like they are, and patterns, and how to break them, and why we are like we are. And, definitely one of my super areas of fascination within that realm has been around mate value and why genders choose the people they choose and what makes it hard. Because, for me, I know that being smart and being successful and various different things make my dating pool really small, because guys usually don't like to have someone more successful than them, perhaps intelligent, various different things. So I'm eternally fascinated by this topic. So thank you for making the time to appease my burning interests.
Oh, my pleasure. It's delightful to be talking to you. I share that burning passion for this topic. I mean, I've devoted my life to studying human mating strategies. And right now I'm actually wrestling with exactly the issues that you raised under the title of the mating crisis. And I'm currently writing a book now with Chris Williamson on that very topic, because
oh my God.
So we indeed have mating crises, but one of the first ones that I actually wrote about, which is an essay that I wrote 7 years ago, was precisely the issue that you identified with, that increasingly there are women who are attractive, successful, professionally accomplished, and they're shrinking pools of men who meet women's standards. So women generally, in my research and others, don't like to settle for guys who are, they want guys who are at least, if not more successful than they are. And this is a problem, whereas guys are more willing to settle for a less, successful, less financially solvent, lower in status, etc., in part because of the evolved mate preferences that have men don't place as high a priority on those attributes, and they do place a higher priority compared to women on physical attractiveness and physical appearance. And of course, women also place a high value on physical appearance, but just not as high as men do. And so what it's doing is it's actually creating two different mating crises. One, a mating crisis among, accomplished, successful women, but then also at the other end, you have the incels, the involuntarily celibate men, a large group of sexless men who are just simply lower in mate value in women's eyes, and so can't find a mate, can't find a sex partner, can't find romance, can't find a long-term
And
relationship.
that's growing, and that's getting worse right now, correct?
It is. It is getting considerably worse, so that you have an astonishing number of young men who are virgins at age 30,
Wow.
and I think there are, multiple causes of this. We can get into the details of this, but I
I'd
think
love to.
a combination of things. Like, one is they're spending all their time behind computer screens, playing video games, on social media and looking at porn. And so they are, to my astonishment, they're not, the stereotype is these guys are living in their mom's basement.
Right.
They're not getting out into the real world. They're not setting goals for themselves. They're not getting ahead. And so they're not performing the what historically has been what men do, is strive in the workplace, and then ancestrally it would have been being ambitious and industrious and intelligent in the domain of hunting, acquiring resources consistently for themselves, for their mate, for their children, for their families, which causes them to rise in status. And then in the modern environment, getting ahead in the workplace, high status, and qualities that lead to success are highly valued by women. So women value guys. And one of the biggest complaints I get from women is like, this guy, he has no goals, he has no drive, he doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. He's not getting ahead. And so you fast forward, you do that enough years, you fast forward to age 40, and then there's these guys who, are still living in their mom's basement. So again, stereotype, but a bunch of truth to that stereotype.
So is it that the attractiveness from a male and female perspective has not changed, but the reality of what a man and a woman is experiencing and being right now is?
Yes. Yeah. I think that summarizes it very accurately. Um, you could say, like, for example, let's take, financial stability or economic solvency or decent financial prospects. This is something that women have valued throughout human history. And you might think, well, nowadays, with successful women who are earning their own income and being financially successful, they don't, quote, need a guy to put bread on the table.
Right.
But they still want a guy. They still don't want to settle for a guy who's lower than they are on these dimensions. And so the way that I think about it is our evolved mate preferences continue to operate in the modern world. And women over the last 10, 20 years have gotten ahead, and are surpassing men on many of these dimensions. So even like in the youngest age brackets, let's say 18 to 30, women are now out earning men in the United States and in many Western countries, and even in Japan and South Korea.
And they're also intellectually outperforming them too when it comes to school as well. So there's been quite a few shifts.
Yeah, educationally, it's been astonishing, and it's really surprised me because these are dramatic cultural shifts that occurred within our lifetimes, in a relatively short period of time. And so, I mean, when I was an undergraduate at
Mhm.
university, I think there was a preponderance of men. I don't know exactly what the stats were, but there was no one talked about a surplus of women. But now, for example, at my university, University of Texas at Austin, there's 54% women in undergraduates and 46% men. You go up to Texas Christian University up near Dallas, it's 60% women, 40% men. And every year it gets a little bit more imbalanced.
Mm.
And then there's the interesting issue of why that's happening. Well, I think
Yeah.
that also is multiply determined. So one is that on the educational front, one of the best predictors of success is high conscientiousness, the personality variable of high conscientious. So people who are reliable, diligent, attend to details, uh, set goals, meet their goals. And women are higher than men on this, sort of all the way up. And then
Mhm.
you combine that with the fact that men are, and these aren't intelligence differences as much as personality differences. That
Mhm.
men are more likely to be on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. And what that means is that so in like grades K through 12, men have more difficulty sitting still. They have more difficulty concentrating. They want to be out doing what men historically did.
Yeah.
And the other stuff
Okay.
is,
Hey, go get a deer.
yeah,
Go
go get a
get
deer.
dinner.
They're play fighting. They're learning hunting skills.
Yeah.
They're outdoors doing physical stuff. They're not used to sitting still in school for 6 to 8 hours. And so on the one hand, women being more conscientious, and then on the other, men being high on this dimension, the spectrum disorders. But even short of the disordered end of the spectrum, you get men are just more distractible, and they're less able to sit still and concentrate on one task at those early ages. So then you fast forward to college applications. Well, women exceed men on quality of getting into a good college.
But you said this is shifted. So why, if this is a pattern within men that they're, wanting to be up and about, moving around and less sort of focused, and women are more, why is it now that women are performing better in school versus men when this pattern essentially hasn't changed?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, and there are a couple reasons for that. Okay, one is that I think that the opportunities for women have basically just opened up. So it used to be expected that women would get married at a very young age, get pregnant, have kids, and then of course that takes you out of the workforce and the educational system typically.
Right.
And so now, though, you have equal opportunity combined with um, a larger segment of the population who are going to college and universities. So it used to be, I don't know. I mean, you go back far enough,
Yeah.
3%, then 5%, then
Sure,
8%.
because women were pregnant and having children, they weren't going to college, they were literally having kids at 22
Yes, yeah,
or
or younger.
19
I
or
mean,
whatever it was.
many in high school. And then you have also other things like, advent of the pill and reliable contraception, meaning that, I mean, young people have sex. That's what they do. And without reliable birth control, then you have a higher pregnancy rate. So you add the pill so that women can control their reproduction, the timing of the reproduction, and then that adds to it as well. So they say, no, I'm not, I want to devote time to my career first, and then worry about mating and getting married. And even within colleges, I mean, it's a stereotype, but it used to be so the only reason women go to college is to get their MRS. That used to be the joke.
Mrs.
Yeah, they find a husband who's going to be
Yeah.
a doctor or a lawyer, and they get married and settle down. And that there was some truth. That's kind of a cliche, but there was some truth to that. And so now, with the men and women expected to be sort of have equal opportunities to do these things, some of the natural proclivities of the sexes and the sex differences are showing up in ways that they weren't earlier, when a smaller segment of the population is going to college and universities. So, and the other thing that kind of adds to that, back to the mating crisis for women,
Mm-hmm.
is that so women are now getting more college degrees, more master's degrees, more PhDs, and then more professional degrees. So this is also occurring with medicine, more MDs, more law degrees, and that takes time. And so then women are older before they're in a position where they say, okay, now I'm ready to settle down and mate.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have this pool of men, the subset of men who are ambitious and get ahead and have good jobs and a reliable income. They are typically marrying women who are younger than they are.
Yep. It's like a whole catch problem. It's like, I've thought about this a lot because of my position. I'm 41. I did used to be married a long, 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 long time ago, but I'm basically single. And so, it's challenging out there. And I kind of wonder, because men, I feel like, seem to not want to settle down for much longer. Like a woman like myself, like a man that's about my age might be trying to find a 26 to 30-year-old woman because now he's ready to commit, but that's the age that they're looking for to have children with, right? Like, because and so like there's this gap for someone like me, let's say, where I'm a little past that. I'm like right at the end of the reproductive years of like deciding to do that or not. But the only kind of guy that you're going to get, like not the only kind of guy, but more predictably, you're probably going to find someone a little bit older, and the younger guy is not available because they've all of a sudden now decided, oh, well, now I'll settle down. It just seems like there's like a miss with sort of goals in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you deal with that? So I'm sure. So in your case, you're attractive, you're successful, you're intelligent, you have a lot going for you, and I'm sure there are many, many, many men who would give their right arm to be with you. But it's a matter of
It says a lot coming from someone who studies why people choose people.
Well, it's just it's accurate, I think, but then for you, given that you have mate preferences you don't want to settle for the guy who's on the janitorial staff of buildings, or what? How do you deal with that?
I guess I'm willing to overlook usually the financial side of things, but the problem is it's actually far more of a problem for them than it is for me.
Yeah.
Like someone that isn't as financially successful or as successful as me, they actually have the bigger problem than I do, even though mate value would say that I want a man that is more successful, has a higher status. It's actually them that has a problem because they're triggered by me.
Here's why, or here's my speculation.
Thank you.
To why is that statistically that is going to create a mate value discrepancy.
Right.
So even though you're fine, with I'm sure you wouldn't be fine if he's like has minimum wage, but I'm sure. So let's say you're willing to relax. He doesn't have to be as financially well off as you are.
Right.
That's fine. But what that means is that that he's going to be intimidated by you still, because statistically there's a higher probability of you finding someone better and trading up and trading him out. Because this is one of the things that has been remarkable, is that with successful women, they no longer put up with a bad relationship or a bad marriage. They're because they can just get out, whereas women in the past, and some women today still are not in that financial position to do that, and so
Right, they're a little more stuck.
they're stuck in these bad relationships or bad marriages, and they can't get out. But hey, if you're financially independent, you're not. You can, and then and so, and there's also, and I'm not saying that this applies to you, but statistically, there's also a higher probability of infidelity by the
By the
higher,
woman?
yeah, by the woman,
Really?
by the higher mate value person in general. So if the man happens to be higher in mate value, he's going to be likely to, probabilistically, so obviously not in all cases. Most people don't have affairs, but something like a third do. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's the higher mate value person who typically is more likely to have an affair and is more likely to leave the relationship. And so he's
Really?
so yeah. So if he this let me put it in stark terms, this lower mate value guy feels very lucky to get involved with you, but also very insecure because realistically, there's a higher probability you might trade him out.
It doesn't lead to a man going and sort of conquering someone underneath them so they can feel important and like of a higher value. You're saying that a woman is still going to be the one that's more likely to cheat in an imbalanced mate value relationship because
Well,
whoever's more successful,
yeah, yeah,
whoever the more successful one is,
right.
because I can see where there could be a spot for, especially for the woman being of higher success and status, being doing that okay, but the man wanting to feel empowered and powerful again by going and cheating with someone of a lower value so they can achieve that feeling that through history has been their pattern.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that captures it quite well. And I mean, this gets to an interesting sex difference in motivations for infidelity.
Yeah, let's
That,
talk about that.
so yeah, so why men cheat, mostly clear. Now we're talking about on average, because people can
Sure.
cheat for a variety of different reasons, but on average, men cheat because they have this desire for sexual variety. And so you see this in some clear cases, like to pick an older example, Hugh Grant
Oh
was
yeah.
with Elizabeth Hurley, drop dead gorgeous model, actress, whatever. And then he's caught, having sex with a prostitute on the street in LA. Like, what's going on? He's not, he's basically trying to satisfy this desire for sexual variety. And people look at that and think he's crazy because, he's with this gorgeous woman. What is he doing? But that's not that atypical. And because a primary reason for men cheating is this desire for sexual variety. It's not because she's better looking or higher in mate value. It's just that she's different.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Whereas for women, the primary motivation, and not the exclusive, but the primary motivation for affairs is because they're unhappy in the relationship and they're looking to either get out of a bad relationship or an unsatisfactory relationship, or looking to trade up in the mating market. So
So
this is the mate switching hypothesis.
is it true that a saying that men cheat to stay and women cheat to leave then?
Um, well, I would say the second is definitely true. Women cheat to leave it. Now we're talking about like about 70 to 80% of women.
Okay.
This is what studies of women who have had affairs. This is what their primary motivation is to get out of a relationship or trade up or segue back into the mating market. Whereas men, it's more like Chris Rock had this quip of like, men are only as faithful as their opportunity. Now, that's an exaggeration because there
God,
are
I hope
plenty of men
so.
who have opportunities who don't act on them.
Right.
It's true of men and women. We have opportunities and we choose not to act on them for a variety of reasons. It could be don't want to jeopardize the marriage, don't want to sacrifice my reputation in the eyes of other people, don't want to, variety of reasons why people choose not, for religious reasons or moral reasons or whatever.
Yeah, let's hope that integrity comes into the into
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, so like a prime example was, and you may be too young to remember this, but there was with President Jimmy Carter. He did an interview at Playboy magazine a long time ago, and he said he had lust in his heart, and that he had committed many adultery many times in his heart. But as far as we know, he never acted on that. But he confessed to what I think most men have, is they have this ferocious desire for sexual variety, but some act on it when the opportunities are there or the costs and risks are low, but many don't act on it. In his case, as far as we know, he never acted on it and was always 100% monogamously faithful to his wife, Rosalind.
I don't think it's the right question to ask, why do men want variety? I'm going to ask instead, what is it that each gender wants sex for, and what does it mean to them? Like, what is the sexual psychology for a man versus a woman that would lead to then, of course, why men want variety?
Well, that's a great question, and a deep question, because it gets to the heart of our evolved sexual psychology. The reason that men have this desire for sexual variety, and it's different for men than women, and it's not that women have zero desire for sexual variety. It's just that it's low on average compared to men, and there's so many examples of this. So just descriptively, a man can walk down a city block and pass half a dozen women and have thoughts about sex with that woman within a span of 2 minutes. And I don't think women do. Now, women do become attracted to, so I hear, even women who are in stable relationships, that John Hamm playing Don Draper, people become infatuated with Don Draper, or George Clooney, or I don't know who, I guess some younger Ryan Gosling.
Sure, I can think of a few. Yeah.
Yeah. Or historic, I don't know where Brad Pitt stands, but he used to be a sex symbol, and women just like would croon over Brad Pitt and perhaps have sexual fantasies about Brad Pitt. But for it's just like it's just still a massive difference. And this shows up, this sex difference, it shows up in things like number of sexual thoughts per day. Men have many more than women. Number of different people you have sexual thoughts about, men much higher than women. Consumption of pornography, about 80% of the pornography is consumed by men than women. And even the nature of the pornography is very different. With men, it's just, there's no plot. There's like, maid comes into the hotel room to clean up the room, and within 10 seconds, they're having sex. Whereas women's pornography tends to be more, have some plot, some context, some romance, so even the nature of men's and women's sexual fantasies are very, very different. And this shows up, for example, in I don't know if you've ever read this, Danica, but like the romance novels, like they used to be called bodice rippers. Where you have on the cover is this like rugged, handsome, dashingly handsome man who happens to be a wildly successful businessman or a prince or whatever. He's like off the charts in status. Women desire him, many women, but he finds himself uncontrollably drawn to this one woman, sort of against his will.
It's the modern day 50 Shades of Grey guy, Christian Grey.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And you can bet who's so these romance novels. It's actually the largest selling book category in the book publishing industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's 95% of the consumers of those books
Women.
are women.
because men like to watch it and women like to read about it.
Yeah, and it taps an entirely different. I mean, it highlights the difference between male and female sexual psychology, and
Is it
these.
an imagination thing? Because like as like a low level example, like you can say to a guy like, "Oh, what should I wear?" And he might not be able to kind of picture. He's like, "I don't know, put something on and I'll tell you." Like, and a girl can go, "Oh, I don't know, like maybe like a cute little black dress with, like some shoes, some like kind of boots. You like, what do you have for boot?" Like a girl might have this vision of what something should
Yeah,
look like, and a guy's like, "I don't know, I need to see it."
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's exactly right, and all the studies point to exactly that. That with men, the visual sense is overwhelmingly the primary sense, whereas women, it use a much wider range of senses that are involved in their sexual attraction. So touch, sound, mood, context, setting, and then to your point about these different imagining different dress scenarios. I mean, women are just more, they devote more time, attention, and effort to even thinking about those things,
Mhm.
and have and most people don't know this, they have a much richer color vocabulary
Oh.
than men. So men, it's like, well, there's like green and red, or and for women, they have like 6 different words for green. Well, there's teal and there's forest green and there's,
There's mint.
yeah, and then, Christmas tree red versus,
Emerald green.
yeah, and yeah. So even women have this much richer sensory vocabulary for colors. So that's another really interesting sex difference. But anyway, so yeah, so you get these fundamental sex differences in our sexual psychology, and then that they play out in the real world in sometimes catastrophic ways. And they also even they play out within relationships themselves, because if you figure, so men have, and this is maybe politically incorrect to say this, but all the data show this, is that men have a higher sex drive on average. Now, there are women with very high sex drives, but men on average have a much higher sex drive.
This is another miss because men's sex drive tends to be sort of that, I don't know, let's call it 20 range, 25, like 18 to 25 feels very high. But then for a woman, it's like later 30s.
Yeah, but yeah, for when it peaks
Right.
within each
Another
sex.
miss in like
Yeah, yeah,
mating.
in which men and women are miscalibrated. Yeah, so in terms of sex drive, ideally, what you want, is a 35-year-old woman with an 18-year-old guy who's the pool boy.
With her 18-year-old fertility level or whatever, if they are wanting to move forward in that direction.
Right. Well, and that's another interesting thing, is that we found in our research that as women's biological clock starts to tick down, their sex drive does go up, and they become more interested in, um, you know, acting. On
Interesting. In correspondence to this internal biological clock that is running out, essentially, is that
I
there's
think that's what it
actually
is.
a real life scenario that plays out to try and mate, because perhaps a baseline human nature is survival, and survival means procreation.
I would reverse that and just say the bottom line of evolution by selection is reproductive success. And so survival is really only a means to that, very important means. Okay, but here's another interesting thing we have to add to the mix here,
Mm.
and that is that uh, if you look at, let's say, a 20-year-old woman in a natural hunter-gatherer group, she looks like a 40-year-old woman in our society. And so I'm looking at you, and if someone just said, like, uh, how old are you? I wouldn't, I would say something like, well, maybe 30, 32, or something like that.
Mhm.
And so part of that is that we live in a modern environment where we're not subjected to the hostile forces of nature. We're not spending 12 hours a day in the sunlight and, tromping through the woods and, gathering berries and so forth. And so you go to these hunter-gatherer societies, younger women do in fact look older, and in our society, quote, older women look quite young, so and so that's another interesting feature of modern living, which I think is great, actually. We could stay.
Well, especially for guys who are very visual.
Yeah, or everybody can stay younger looking for longer
Yeah,
than what's the case historically.
it's true. What is the true significance of cheating then? Because women are more emotional, men tend to be more, about variety. So yeah, elaborate on the emotional side of sex from each perspective.
A wonderful question, and again, there are these profound sex differences. So let's take affairs, for example. So in studies of like, why did you have the affair, or what would be, if you were to have an affair, what would be the reason? So what the studies show is that 79% of women who have affairs fall in love with their affair partner and become emotionally attached to or emotionally involved with their affair partner. For men, that corresponding number is about 30%. So there's this huge difference there. And another indication is just even for people who don't have affairs, sex and emotional connection are more disjunctive in men. They're like more separate things. So like a study that was done. So this was done originally on a college campus. So they had male and female Confederates, as they were called. This doesn't mean people from the South, but it's just members of the experimental team who were judged to be moderately attractive, walk up to members of the opposite sex on a college campus and say, "Hi, I've been noticing you around campus lately. I find you very attractive. Would you," and they asked them one of three questions. "Would you go on a date with me? Would you come back to my apartment with me? Would you have sex with me?" And they simply recorded the percentage of individuals who agreed to these three different requests. And of the women approached, about 50% agreed to go out on a date with the guy, 6% agreed to go back to his apartment, and 0% agreed to have sex.
Of course.
Women typically needed a little more information about the guy. Of the men approached by the female Confederate, also about 50% agreed to go on a date with her, 69% agreed to go back to her apartment, and 75% agreed to have sex with her.
How you're a man, how do you answer, "Yes, I'll just go back and have sex with you"? Let's just start there. Let's start there.
It's a great question. And well, first of all, one qualifier is that these Confederates were judged to be moderately attractive, and equally so. For men, sexual opportunities are very rare. Now, it may not seem that way in the modern environment with Tinder and college campus hookups and everything, but historically, sexual opportunities were very rare. And even in the modern environment, so you go on Tinder, for example, and or OkCupid is another dating site, and there's studies done of just rate how attractive members of the opposite sex are. And men rating women, it shows this normal bell-shaped distribution where some women are very attractive, some women are not so attractive, and there, is a large number and kind of in the middle or a different range. You ask women how attractive men are, only about 20% make it up above threshold. And most women find most men just to be below threshold on attractiveness. And so what that means is that men find women on average more attractive than women find men. And so these guys who are approached by a woman, this has probably never happened to them in their life. I mean, of course, it happens to movie stars, or
right, because it's a very small amount of men that are actually getting the action.
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
ranking of it all, because there's so much criteria and so much judgment on if a woman wants to mate with that or have sex with him or connect with him. So there's just, the pool is tiny of the men that are actually having sex with women.
Right. Exactly. And it's gotten tinier in the sense that the men who are having sex, let's say the top 20%, are having a lot of it. That is,
Right.
a lot of it with a larger number of women, and then in essence monopolizing those, leaving a larger and larger share of men who are sexless, and that's why you have these phenomena. Now, the incel is an extreme example, but there's this pool of men who just can't find women who are attracted to them. And this is where this gets back to our earlier discussion of the mating crisis, where these guys are spending all their time on watching pornography, on social media, playing video games, and so they're not interacting in real life. And how do you develop mating skills? Skills of attraction, skills of social interaction. So you actually have to meet people and interact in real life. And these guys are not doing that. And so there's been a rise of anxiety. And I think it's actually anxiety of several different sorts. One is simply social anxiety, where men feel awkward. And especially when they meet an attractive woman, they don't know what to say, what to talk about, or and they get kind of paralyzed with anxiety. And so people tend to avoid things that they're anxious about. So it kind of is a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And men fear. Second one is like a subset, is men fear rejection.
Yeah.
And which is, when they approach a woman, and they fear being shot down, for good reason, because they often are shot down. But the fear of rejection has this paradoxical quality where, even though we're supposed to live in the sexually egalitarian world, 90% of women still expect the guy to make the first move.
Right. Another catch.
So they're expecting the guy to make the first move. He's paralyzed with anxiety and doesn't want to risk being shot down. And so they tend to avoid interacting with women, and so don't develop the kinds of mating skills that they need.
There's a whole movement around men becoming more vulnerable, right? Men breaking this old paradigm of women come home and clean and cook and they go to work and they don't have to be emotionally available or tell them a damn thing. And women are like, we don't want that anymore. Look, it's not connected. I don't feel connected to you. I want you to show up for me in an emotional way. I want you to share with me. I want you to be more vulnerable. I want to hear about your feelings. I want to know about those things. So now you're talking about how a man is so scared to be let down, so rejected. He doesn't want to deal with the anxiety or the pressures. And so there are so many opportunities to go into a solitary land of pornography and of video games, where they don't have to interact. They don't have to be on. They don't have to have the potential of getting disappointed. So it feels like actually part of this package of what women are expecting men to be. And men are just getting squeezed so hard. There's so much temptation to not have to deal with it. There's so many opportunities to not have to deal with it, but it's actually making it worse for men. And they're becoming even more unavailable because they don't even show up, let alone know how to talk to someone. So it kind of feels like part of that expectation level that I believe women really do want now. Like, we're just not okay with you being emotionally unavailable, because one thing that women traditionally can sense more than men is energy and the true feelings of what's going on.
Yes.
And we're not okay with pushing that down because we have options to leave now. So we don't have to just put up with disconnection. We can go find it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great set of points. And But I would add a nuance to what you just said, and that is that women do want guys who are emotionally available, not just to, talk about their emotions and feelings, but also to be genuinely interested in a woman's emotional life as well. Okay, but women don't want a guy to be emotionally weak, you know.
Right. So
So,
tell me what the difference is then. How do you become an emotionally vulnerable, available man, but not weak?
well, I think the weak is falling apart under pressure, or that is, we all experience stresses and strains and problems and road bumps and uh, difficulties that we have to cope with, and so women want a guy who can talk about those but not fall apart under stress, not curl up in a ball in the bedroom and be beaten down by those, because in fact it's a sign of strength, and resilience to be able to face the hurdles and problems that we all face and make it through them and figure out ways to solve them and get past them. And so there is that issue, and I wonder, and this is, I mean, I haven't thought about this deeply, but your set of points raises this issue of how do men develop the ability to be emotionally available and communicative, but not also show emotional weakness?
Mhm.
Because I think that's
Mhm.
part of what men are afraid of,
Mhm.
is that they don't want to appear weak.
And then the question is, what is weak? How would you define that?
Yeah, falling apart, not having the psychological resources to be able to cope with the challenges that everyone has to face in day-to-day life.
Okay, so it feels to me like a man wants to have the answers. He wants to solve problems. But the thing about being emotionally available and vulnerable is that you don't have the answer.
Right, right. Yeah,
That's like the
yeah,
dichotomy of it. The paradox is that the vulnerability is like, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. I'm scared. I'm sad. I'm whatever. I feel this negative energy and I don't know how to fix it, which is the vulnerability. That right? Otherwise it's not a vulnerability. It's just a damn solution and you just go to work. Like
right,
you wouldn't
right.
be sharing your sadness if you knew exactly how to solve the problem at work or to solve the problem with your partner or with your parents. You wouldn't be a wreck because you'd have the solution and you just go do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's another sex difference right there, is that sometimes, and I encounter this so often in couples, is let's say the woman wants to talk about some difficulty she's having at work, or with a coworker or something like that. And the guys there were like, okay, you're here. There's a straight line to solving the problem. B. Now let's get dinner. And the woman doesn't necessarily want a solution provided. She wants the guy to listen to her describe what the nuances and nature of the issues are.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so there's, but I think guys are typically more solution oriented in that, and then that upsets the woman because she wants the guy to listen to her and
Mhm,
listen to all
mhm.
the nuances and details and so forth. You even see this in conversations where, um, and I've seen so many of these where a woman's talking to another woman, and she says, let's say they're talking about a date that they went on, a date that one of them went on the night before. And so they'll say, well, and then I said this and he said that, and I said this and he said that. And the other one will say, well, now what was his facial expression when he said that? And so they go into the nuances and details and minutia of their interaction. And
Mhm.
guys don't do that. I said, like, well, how did the date go? It went great. We had sex. It was wonderful. Or I wanted to have sex. She didn't want to, so I was frustrated. So it's a very different nature of male and female communication, and create some problems in relationships because they're communicating using very different styles.
Yeah, true. But I will say, as you were describing the scenario of, there's a problem, here's a solution. I'm like the guy. Like, I am practical, rational. You have a problem, I want to help you fix it. So, do you think that there's also a problem with the kind of woman that a successful female is becoming by being more in charge, creating more of those rational, problem solving techniques? Because that's part of the nature of being someone successful is you're usually managing people, you're usually directing things, you're in charge. And so that then trickles down into regular life. And then this sort of soft, emotional, oh, what? And becomes this, what happened today? Oh, do this. And it's like maybe a man really wants to be heard too, or not. Like, is there a evolutionary sort of issue with a female becoming more successful or having more status, more more of a working woman, and the kind of woman she's becoming not being what a man really wants anymore?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I could speculate on that. I don't know, but my guess is from the woman's point of view, she wants a guy who is also good at and talented at those kinds of decision making abilities.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and uh, women don't want a guy who's so wishy washy or um, doesn't know how to solve problems in that directive way. Um, and so again, we might get back to that issue that you first brought up, Danica, in our early part of our conversation, which is that some of these guys would be intimidated by women who have those capabilities.
So, yes, I've thought about that a lot. And the word that comes up when I go into that space of being intimidated is really triggered, because a man wants to feel powerful, and this is my understanding. A man wants to feel powerful, he wants to feel accomplished, successful. He wants to have that mate status value of being higher. He wants that. He wants that status situation. And so when a man comes across a woman that challenges that, he now has to see himself in that scenario. He now is actually getting that mirror to, you're not that. And
Right.
he's triggered because he hasn't reached higher, challenged himself enough, or been lucky enough to be in the right scenario, to work for the right person, to climb the ladder, to get the salary, to whatever it may be. Like, I don't know. Is there intimidated feels like an unfinished thought to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, intimidated in the sense that we talked about earlier that, um, so one, I mean, in the mating world, so there's mate selection, there's mate attraction. So there has to be mutual mate selection, mutual attraction, but there's also the problem of mate retention. So attracting someone is not enough. There's mate retention, and as we know, there's high breakup rates, and with guys, they want to be successful mate retainers, so they don't want to lose the woman. And so again, if those are indicators that she's higher in mate value, then statistically she's going to be more likely to defect and leave the relationship. And so that's why. And trigger sexual jealousy. By the way, so the lower mate value guys get triggered in terms of sexual jealousy because they realistically, I think, appraise that the woman has other options, and those other options might be better than he is. And so again, it's sort of a realistic. So you can say as well, it's due to the fragile male ego, and he just can't handle it. But there's also a real component that the woman, in reality, is more likely to trade up if she's with a guy like that.
Hmm. What about this whole? Well, let's start with monogamy first, because we've already identified there are differences in why a man versus a woman has sex and or cheats. That there's different reasons for that. So is monogamy completely natural?
I get asked this question a lot. Are humans fundamentally monogamous, or are we fundamentally polygynous or promiscuous or polyamorous?
Right. Is marriage and mating just to do with now, like back in the old days, with keeping family land in the family, or, riches or things like that, or,
The way I think about it is that humans have an evolved menu of mating strategies. We don't just have one. Long-term mating, pair bonding, and attachment. And I think that is part of our mating strategy. So if you go to our closest primate relative, who's the chimpanzee, with whom we share more than 98% of our DNA, they don't have anything resembling a long-term mating strategy or a pair-bonded mating strategy. They have the female comes into estrus, female chimp. Males mate with that female when she's in estrus. She doesn't conceal it. You get the bright red genital swellings and the olfactory cues. And then after the estrus phase, the males are indifferent and they don't interact much with the females anymore. And they don't do anything for the offspring either. So, but in humans, you have these three things that have co-evolved. So you have one is the evolution of long-term pair bonds,
right,
and it's one of the mating strategies amidst this menu. Two, you have relatively concealed ovulation. So compared to our chimps, men can't tell when women are ovulating or not, and a lot of women can't tell. Now, some women are very sensitive to their bodies in the modern environment. You can get that information. But three, you have the evolution of very high male parental investment. So in contrast to the male chimps, men do invest heavily in offspring. Not always, of course. We have deadbeat dads and guys who abandon their families and all that. But compared to all other primate species, human males, men do invest sometimes a couple of decades or more in their children. They protect them, they feed them, they provision them, they put a shelter over their heads, etc. So we definitely have long-term pair bonded mating. Now that doesn't necessarily mean monogamous mating, because we also have short-term mating. We have affair mating, infidelity, as I mentioned. We have serial mating, which is very common in our species. So you mate with one person for a while, break up, and then mate with another person for a while, break up, and so forth. And that's a very common pattern, especially in the modern environment. And then we have people who mix and match, and then a small minority of people do polyamory. And then historically, there's also been polygyny, which is one man, multiple wives. And that is against the law in this country, but we have sometimes what you might call effective polygyny, which is that top 20% of the men sometimes engage in, not necessarily simultaneous wives, but maybe one long-term mate after another, after another, after another. So an extreme example might be Leonardo DiCaprio, who I'm sure you've seen those charts where as he gets older, the age of his girlfriends stays the same. Yeah.
Lucky him.
But he's an extreme example of that. But I guess, there are other examples. George Clooney, I think, sort of did that for a while before he settled down to what seems like a very happy long-term marriage.
Right. So, what triggers that?
What triggers settling down to a happy long-term marriage? I don't know. That's a great question. I know one guy, and I don't know if this is a general answer, but his view is he's going to mate as much as he can with different women until his mate value kind of plateaus, and then he's going to try to lock in a high mate
best
value
you can find.
woman. So, and I don't know. You also have another example of that in the Hollywood arena is Warren Beatty, who was a notorious ladies' man in his day, but then met Annette Benning and settled down to I don't know, 25-year, 30-year relationship with 4 kids and so forth. So probably good not to count on a guy in his 20s settling down if he's in that top 20%.
Oh, that is the catch right there. If he's in the top 20%, be careful of that.
Yeah.
Explain more, because they have more options.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And like Chris Rock said, you're only as loyal as your options.
Yeah. Yeah. An exaggeration, but there's some truth to it as well. That men who have the opportunity stuff, and that's why you get that's why it becomes problematic for, and I know, your involvement in racing and the sports world, and you're familiar with all that. The star athletes and sports figures and rock stars, they get a huge amount of attention from women.
Oh yeah, the women definitely make it obvious for the men. I can't say that from the other perspective, being a female athlete, the men don't make it as obvious to women. They can, but I think it's a much more dangerous situation for a woman wanting one of those top 20% men, who especially are elite level performers and celebrities, to imagine that that's going to go well if you want.
Right. And the and the problem is that it doesn't stop. So even after let's say Leonardo DiCaprio, let's say he settles down and gets married, does that mean that there are no longer going to be any women interested in him? Well, I think the women will continue to be interested in him. And that offers a set of temptations that men are tempted to act on. Some do, but as we talked about earlier, some don't. Some don't want to jeopardize their relationship and choose not to act on those things.
So you mentioned polyamory, which is something that I'm curious about, because it does seem like the relationship realm is shifting. Somehow it's shifting. So polyamory is one of those things that has become more popular for sure. So have you come across any studies, data on polyamory working long term? Is this merely a phase of trying to figure out? Because I feel like when there's shifts in culture and patterns, the pendulum kind of can swing a bit. And we're not always in a place that we're going to stay, but we're trying to kind of find where we can settle, but it's not where we were. So is polyamory really a real option emerging in the dating market and in relationships, or is this merely a phase on its way to something?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I don't know the final answer to that. It's talked about more, it's written about more. There's more open polyamory than there used to be. I don't know if the actual rates have gone up. I guess it wouldn't surprise me if they have. Historically, open relationships, which is another term for it. There's all these different terms. So there's consensual monogamy, open relationships, swinging. Historically, they have tended not to work. One form of polyamory is you have one primary partner, but then you have an open relationship where you allow the other person to do X, Y, or Z, and the X, Y, or Z is typically worked out if it's consensual in an explicit kind of way, where you allow the other person to do X and Y, but not Z. And I know I've talked to many people who are, not many, but I've talked to, let's say, a dozen people who are polyamorous, who are friends, students, etc. And I think that, my intuition is that it can work, but only for a very small minority of people. I think most people are not cut out for it. And the reason is that once you introduce other people into the mix, then there's always the danger of, let's say, jettisoning the primary partner and switching to one of your paramours, But there's also sexual jealousy. And this is an emotion that we've touched on earlier, but I wrote a whole book on sexual jealousy, infidelity and sexual jealousy. And it's a very powerful emotion. And it comes online when people fall in love and they form a long-term pair bonded attachment to the other. And so this is one of they even call it the monster figure in the polyamorous community. Like, how do we cope with this jealousy? Because it's not like it goes away.
Yeah.
So now I think there's some people who are really on the low side of jealousy and so can somehow deal with their partner having sex. But I know, just I'll give you one example of a couple that I know who they are each other's primary polyamorous partner, but they allow each other to have sex with other people. In her case, she's bisexual. And so she's sometimes has sex with other women, sometimes other men. And when I talk to him, he says that it doesn't bother him very much if she has sex with another woman, but it really bothers him when she has sex with another man. And then what she says is she says, well, it doesn't bother me if he has sex with women, but one time I saw him walking down the street holding hands with one of his paramours, and that really triggered her jealousy. And so,
It's
and
more
that gets,
emotional then.
yeah, exactly. That is the emotional dimensions of infidelity or involvement with other people are much more bothersome to women than to men. And the sexual aspects of the infidelity, especially in this case, heterosexual aspects, are much more bothersome to men. And that's reflective of, there's a large literature on sex differences and the triggers of jealousy. Those who choose a polyamorous lifestyle always have to struggle with jealousy, with sexual jealousy, and they find ways to get around it and ways to minimize its negative impact on their relationship. But the short answer to your question is there haven't been long-term studies to see whether these things actually work out over the long run. And I'll mention one other sex difference in that. So I know this one woman who was in a polyamorous relationship, and it was, and this I think is often the case, that it's the guy who wants to drag the woman into the polyamorous relationship for the desire for sexual variety, I think is the motive behind it. And women sometimes go along with that because they want to keep the guy. That is, it's a mate retention tactic. Even though, they're willing to go along, even though it's not their preferred option, they're afraid of losing him. So they go along with it. So there's an on average sex difference in that. But this woman that I'm thinking about, she was, visited, she was extolling all the virtues of polyamory or whatever. And then she got divorced from her primary partner. They were married, and subsequently she got remarried and had a kid, and is no longer at all, from that moment of the divorce, and no longer involved in the polyamorous community.
Right.
And so my guess is that that's more typical, but we don't really know. So there haven't been, good long-term studies of polyamorous
Well, it
relationships.
requires them to be honest too. It requires people to be open
Yeah.
to talking about it, honest about their situation, and it's also a much more new pattern in society that
Yeah.
is something people are sharing more about. Like, what's the reason for someone to have enough discipline to choose someone and stay with them and stay monogamous and loyal?
Part of it might be that people have to adjust their mate preferences. So the things that people select on are not necessarily the things that lead to long-term, stable, happy relationships. So the other side of it, just to add a wrinkle to your question, is that there are people who do stay married and do stay monogamous, but they live lives of the proverbial lives of quiet desperation, where they feel unhappy or unfulfilled or unsatisfied, but it's not bad enough for them to leave the relationship and go back out in the mating market.
Dangerous place to be, for it to be not bad enough, but also not good enough.
Yes, yeah, and I think there's a chunk of people who fall in that category, and so they stick it out even though it's, and then they get to the end of their life, and yeah, they were monogamous, they were loyal, but didn't necessarily lead a very fulfilling life in that respect. But in terms of selecting, like one of the most important predictors of um, marital happiness to studies of married couples is emotional stability. And this circles back to another theme that we talked about earlier. And one way to think about emotional stability is, I mean, there are other words for it: moodiness or emotional lability or emotional reactiveness, or whatever. But it's a very important personality dimension. And one way to think about it is that we all experience challenges and problems and stress, and what happens with emotionally unstable people is they get their equilibrium gets knocked out of whack, and it takes them a long time to return to that stable psychological equilibrium. Whereas emotionally stable people, they might get upset or they might get angry or whatever, but then they return to baseline much more quickly. And so that's one key hallmark of that. And what I found, so I've studied newlywed couples and married couples and looked at, well, what predicts conflict in relationships and what predicts, marital satisfaction and whether they're going to stay together over the long term. And this is one of the most important personality variables that predicts that. So if you're with someone who's emotionally unstable, um, then you're in for all kinds of problems and conflict, and they're just a net drain. They what I call high relationship load. It's so we have things like mutation load, parasite load, different types of loads. And there's a concept that I've termed relationship load, where someone just is, it's costly to deal with this person because they're always upset. They're always, raising problems. They're just like, and that takes time and attention and effort away from other life tasks that people need to do. But anyway, nobody, or very few people, prioritize this personality dimension when they select mates. They go on, well, is this person attractive? Are they do they have high status? Are they respected by their peers? Maybe in long-term pair bonded mating, are they a kind person or a generous person? Do they have a good suite of personality characteristics? But emotional stability is not something you can assess accurately very quickly. And so that's why I tell people, if you're getting serious about someone, go on vacation to a foreign country where neither of you speak the language and where you have to, you know, face stresses and strains and get by in different ways. And I'm not talking about going to a resort where everything is included and everyone does everything for you. I'm talking about like,
come on, it's the only way I do it.
well, but that's not the way to find out what the personality characteristics of your partner are. And I think it's just one way to very quickly fast track getting an accurate assay of these personality characteristics. And so, but very few people place a priority on that in their mate selection. And so I think one way to think about it is we need to prioritize things. If you want a long-term, stable, happy, monogamous relationship, you need to prioritize things that are actually going to lead to that. And the things that we prioritize don't necessarily lead to that. They may lead to other things. Excitement, you marry someone who's high in status and gets invited to all the celebrity events or whatever. It might be a very exciting life, but it might be a very short-lived life. Or in terms of the relationship. Well, let me ask you, what's the longest relationship you've had?
Almost 10 years.
10 years?
Actually,
Okay.
this is how it's gone. 10 years, almost 5 years, 2.5 years, 1 year, 2 months.
Oh, really? Wow. Wow. Okay.
What
So,
does that say? I don't know.
Yeah.
I laugh and say that the next one is totally the one, or it's a week, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting pattern. Well, so what do you think accounts for the shift in the longevity of your relationships?
I think it's putting up with less, knowing myself better, having more self-awareness, and not being willing to deal with not being happy. Always having options. I've always had options, like you talked about in the beginning, that some women, especially more in the past when there was less financial stability upon both parties, I've said from the beginning, I'm not stuck. I don't have children with anyone. There's multiple houses. I'm not stuck. If I'm not happy, I deserve to be happy too. I don't have to stay.
Okay. So do you think that there has been anything in your pattern of mate selection that has resulted in these shorter time periods? Or are you selecting for the same qualities, but you're just less willing to put up with the
That's a good question. I think that yes is true to the second part where you said I'm less willing to put up with things. But I also think, and maybe you've kind of researched around this too, but I also think that we date with a pattern. And so this usually is derived from our familial situation where in my scenario I learned that, I was attracting guys that were like my dad because the original wound of trauma and relationally came from my dad. So we move forward in life and we try and right the original wrong with each relationship, but we never can because we're picking a pattern that's just a pattern. And it becomes less and less tolerable to us because we, like, as a being, we become more and more aware of it. And we're trying to get to the point where we don't now seek that pattern anymore. And that's not a wound to heal. It is healed or it is acknowledged. And learning that I acted like my mom, which was ultimately the most important piece of the puzzle, not the dad dynamic, but actually that I acted like my mom, that then allowed me to be in these relationships, was what gave me more keys to be able to go, okay, I can't do that. Like for me, it was being emotionally unavailable for me, which meant the way that I treated myself was I was emotionally not taking care of myself and completely ignoring my emotions myself. Like I was treating myself the same way my mom was treating me. And that was the same way I'm sure her mom was treating her. And, because it's a pattern. And so now my work is to go, I am not going to emotionally abandon myself, my inner child, whatever you want to call it, because it makes me unhappy and I want to be happy. So I have to treat myself with emotional presence and availability.
so
And
how
respect.
how would that translate into your mate selections? So have you altered the qualities that you look for in a potential mate?
It created boundaries. So, those boundaries get laid down pretty quickly and pretty solidly. Like, I'm not going to put up with this. This isn't going to work for me. As opposed to in the past, just moving through life and just going, not stating what I needed, didn't even know what I needed, and
Yeah.
was way too afraid to say what I needed because it might not fit and then they might go.
Yeah.
So codependency being a part of that too. So I wonder how much of sort of the mating world is derived not only from sort of the status situation that we've talked about a lot, but also trauma.
Yeah. Well, but it sounds like given that emotional availability and expressiveness is very important to your happiness, how
Mhm.
do you identify that quality or that set of qualities in a potential mate?
You go through some trials and you go through some challenges, and also their ability to share and ultimately share things that are unbecoming.
Yeah.
I think that's a good indicator of when someone is emotionally available, is that they want your help. They ask for assistance in some way. They share that they don't have the answer, as well as that they are willing to share things vulnerably that are not so becoming, but it's honest and part of their story.
Yeah. Well, and that's a sign of psychological strength, someone who's willing to do that.
Yeah.
vulnerable and share weaknesses, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can't say I have all the answers. I'm by no means, and it's not like I'm like, yeah, and all of a sudden I figured it out and I've been married for 10 years, super happy. Marriage. Do you think that this is an institution that is necessary, that is going to remain or be changed different and have a different opinion of?
There's been a pretty substantial decline in marriage rates over the last 10 years or so. I'm inclined to think that it will remain. It maybe not at high levels or as frequently or with as large a share of the population as has been true historically. But I think that what marriage is it's part of that pair bonding long-term mating strategy where you are sending a signal of public commitment. That's what
Mhm.
marriage has always been, a public commitment. It's less for you than telling the social world that you are in this committed relationship with this person. And I think that public commitment is an essential part of marriage. So I mean, yeah, you can have a happy long-term mateship that no one knows about, or that you don't public broadcast, or we're just dating. But I think that making that public commitment helps people to want to work through some of the trials and tribulations that all relationships go through. I mean, and so I think it's here to stay. I think it used to be the expectation was that everybody will find someone and get married and live happily ever after or miserably ever after, as the case may be.
Yeah.
And I think that there are more different lifestyles that are available and permissible, and so it used to be there's a huge stigma associated with getting divorced, for example,
Yeah.
and now there isn't. I mean, everybody's got married and got divorced, and but I think it's here to stay, but not for as large a share of the population, perhaps due to the availability of alternative lifestyles.
Okay, well, what about the idea that, or the potential that marriage, which implies something legal, what if it becomes commitment ceremonies of public awareness, right? Like, so you
Yeah,
go get married, essentially, you do all the same things, but it's just not a legal thing. Like,
yeah,
it's a ceremony, there's rings, there's the sign that you're with, it's sort of like the eternal marker that you're taken. There's people there, there's pictures, there's the whole thing. It's just like marriage, but it's not legal. Because that seems like, there's that sort of saying, like, can't believe that, we take this beautiful relationship and then get the legal team involved. Like, is that really necessary?
yeah. I don't think it is necessary as long as it has that kind of public signal of
Interesting.
commitment. Yeah, I don't.
I like that.
I'm not a big fan of the government getting involved in personal relationships myself. But I think the public aspect of the commitment is what's critical.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that. I think that makes sense. What ends up leading to, like, with the study of evolutionary psychology, you're essentially, you're looking at these patterns of history and how they evolve. And I'm sure I'm not articulating it all perfectly for, like, the correct definition exactly. But what I'm really just wondering is, how does it change? Like, what is it that creates a shift in culture and in society that is then something that you go and look back on time and go, it changed like this? Like, what is it that creates those shifts in culture?
Well, that's a huge question.
Oh, shoot.
Uh, I mean, we could spend at least an hour talking about that. But I think the
Next
way that I
time.
think about it is that we have this evolved psychology, which is just like we have an evolved set of food preferences. That is, we all have taste preferences for sugar, fat, salt, and protein. And in the modern environment, we're just kind of activating our taste preferences. But the modern world is so fundamentally different and is changing at an increasingly accelerating rate, especially in the mating arena, where 10 years ago you had a little bit of online dating. Now everybody's doing online dating, or it's got totally destigmatized. So
Right.
everybody, I know one student of mine, she said she's literally never been on a date with anyone that she hasn't first met online. And this is, to me, this is crazy because, I mean, you want to meet people in real life. But the dramatic shift toward online dating, I think, is creating a massive cultural shift. The availability of online pornography and the consumption of online pornography has created a massive shift. I think social media and the design of social media to capture our attention and absorb our attention, and all these things are changing. So we're living with this evolved ancient psychology that evolved for a world that we no longer live in. And so there's a mismatch or suite of mismatches between the circumstances in which we evolved and the current environment in which we live. And so I think some of these things are having detrimental impacts, like the huge proliferation of just social media, for example.
Right.
Um, there's some evidence, at least, that it's resulted in increases in depression and anxiety.
For
Um,
sure.
in part because we evolved in social groups where social relationships are critical to our survival, have always been critical to our survival, but also to our happiness and sense of well-being. And now people have, 1,000 Facebook friends who they've never met, but they don't have any real relationships, where they
Yeah.
feel someone is deeply involved in their welfare. And I think that's actually what's characteristic of a good long-term mateship, is someone who is deeply involved in your welfare and you're deeply involved in their welfare. And we,
Mm.
we don't have that as much nowadays, with so
Yeah.
much superficial social interaction that occurs through messaging and online stuff, and less real life interaction and real life relationships.
Oh,
So I think that recognizing some of these mismatches is critical to solving some of the problems we're facing with the current changes in our environment and cultural evolution.
I love that. To care about each other. Like it's just really feels like a macro solution to so many things right now.
Yeah,
Is just
yeah.
this.
Another phrase that I use is deep engagement.
Hmm.
You want to have deep engagement with another person, and that's how you know who your true friends are, as well as who a true mate is for you. And in the modern environment, we have like a million superficial quote friends, but a lack of deep engagement. So,
What would signify that deep engagement? Could you give us all just a couple bullet points of what that looks like so that we can try and go achieve that?
well, well, that's also a complicated question. But one thing is what I call, and this is in the terms of evolutionary psychology, and it's kind of a clunky phrase, but an altruistic welfare trade-off ratio. And what welfare trade-off ratio is, let's say we're in a relationship. How much value do I place on my welfare relative to your welfare? And so a successful relationship is one where I place a tremendous value on your welfare, and you also place a tremendous value on my welfare. So what that means is I'm making sacrifices. So instead of, let's say, I don't know, um, going to the bar to have drinks with my buddy, you need to talk through a problem or whatever, that I'm willing to sacrifice going to the bar and having drinks with my buddies because you need me now. And similarly, you are willing to make personal sacrifices at times for my welfare. And so I think that an altruistically skewed welfare trade-off ratio is one of the keys to that, as opposed to a selfishly skewed welfare trade-off ratio where someone says, no, I have my needs, my wants, or whatever. So I'm just going to do whatever I want. And, who cares about the effect on you? If it makes you unhappy, then just get over it. That's not going to work.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents on that question.
Perfect. I'm sure. Thank you for deducing it down to something that we can grab onto in this conversation. And hopefully someday we have another conversation, maybe when this book comes out. I'm so excited you're writing with Chris. Chris is obviously super fascinated with evolutionary psychology as well. He's super smart guy. He's great with statistics and loves to dive into the science and the, all the research on things. So you guys will be a great team on that.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of we have very complementary skills. I'm more the basic scientist who's studied human mating for years and years and years, and he is super smart and also good with statistics, but he's also a very good communicator. He can take findings and studies and communicate them in a succinct and powerful way that people get the message. And so I have a lot of respect for him and become friends with him. He lives here in Austin.
Yeah. Everybody, you live in Austin?
Yeah.
Everybody lives in Austin.
Yeah, I know. So, well, it's a good place to live.
Well, thank you so much for this time and all of this information. I look forward to exploring in the future how we've evolved and more solutions.
Yes. Okay. Terrific. And best of luck between now and F1. Best of luck in your mating life.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.